I'm very much aware of the fact that there's not a lot I can do about other people around me. It's actually a pretty fruitless task, and so if your task is to sit here tonight and figure out somebody else's problems and sibling difficulties, then you're going to fail. Because it's not even going to help you. Really. The only thing we can take a lot of action about is about ourselves, about who we are and how we react and what we do and why, and understanding why we do those things so that we might not continue doing some of the things that are really destructive. I look back in my own past and my relationship with the family, and there were some things that I did that really didn't help, and there were other things I had no idea why the things were happening that were. And I tended to, often when I was younger, self-blame. That was part of my personality and background and part of who I am and who I was as a person when I was younger. So when we share this tonight, I really would like us to grasp with the fact that there's a whole bunch of information that you should just forget. That's not a good start to the beginning of a message, is it? Because there are only some things that you're going to need to take away from this tonight. And maybe you'll get some insights into some other issues and things that pop up. But in terms of the subject that we're looking at tonight, this whole thing of sibling rivalry, we're looking at it in terms of understanding the impact of our birth orders on ourselves and how that might help us to relate better within our own families. Why you were treated perhaps the way you were by your parents. And by the way, most of us as parents, even those of us that have had the benefit of doing some pretty solid study on some of these subjects, still find ourselves wandering in the miry darkness of wondering what is coming around the corner next. And when it does, our ability to respond is dependent on our willingness to be reshaped ourselves. If we're not willing to be reshaped, then disaster will be forthcoming with our children. Know yourself, or in the old terms that used to be said when I was younger, know thyself. Strange words. Though it was a powerful principle that people used to espouse. They used to talk about so strongly. If you know yourself, you can do things better. Well, there's a kind of a truth in that. Because when you understand your strengths and preferences, the things you're wired up with and wired up to be, then you're in a powerful position to maximize those strengths and to compensate for any weaknesses, either by working differently with your family and those around you, or maybe by surrounding yourself with people that can actually work with you and your strengths. That's the kind of thing we can come out of tonight. Most of us have dominant birth order personality matches that are birth positions that we come in. And I want to say this right at the beginning. Huge amounts of research have been done on this subject. There's been quite a lot of research done for a long period of time, in fact. But even beyond the research, there have been sayings within community which clearly portray the truths of some of the things that have been discovered in the research. But that personality that you have is also influenced by all sorts of variables, such as your temperament, your gender, and perhaps other family circumstances. So I don't want to say this is just a simple recipe, and if you get A, B, and C, it all lines up, and you'll know exactly what it's like. It doesn't work quite as simply as that. But there are some very clear ground rules. So it's not so much where you are born in your family, but how you function that counts. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. We want to be able to be in a place where we function better than we ever have before. But the difficulty is, and this we come back to the same thing, the way that we function really does correlate with our birth position. I used to often refer to myself for years as a withdrawn introvert who didn't like to be up in front of people, And that was clearly the case. I didn't like those kinds of things. And so when I first saw birth order stuff many years ago, I thought they got it wrong. And I really didn't see much of it, just little snippets of it, and that's a lot of rubbish. That was my equation to it. The difficulty is, more recently in some of the reading I've been doing, I've suddenly realized how much truer of me it is than I would have ever have believed. And as I've gotten older, I've become even more poignantly who I am. I'm a firstborn son in a family. And what complicated my situation was kind of difficult, and I'm going to touch on that. So tonight, in this journey, you're going to need to be fairly quick of mind. If people really do want some notes afterwards, I'm sure we can sort that out. But I want to pick up on 3 sibling stories that come out of the Bible. These 3 sibling stories. The first one, Cain and Abel. 2 brothers, one gets jealous of the other. Who was the oldest? Cain. And why did he get jealous? Some of you know the story, some of your visitors and guests here, you won't know the story, but you probably heard of Cain and Abel. You know, Abel always seemed to do things better. In his eyes, he got really angry about it, and his whole deal that he deserved to do things the way he wanted to fell apart when he killed his brother. And God got pretty displeased with him and kicked him out. So there was a sibling story. Then we come to another story. Joseph and his brothers, a whole bunch of brothers. And these brothers were really jealous of Joseph because he was a young brother. And we picked the story up in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, in chapter 37. And we find this intriguing story where his father had this young man, Joseph, at a very old age. And so he came as a little bit of a surprise, in a way. And so what happened with this father, probably because of his gender order, he spoilt Joseph. He particularly loved Joseph. And one of the reasons that happens is because, we all see it so often. It doesn't happen in every family, but high percentage of family, the further the thing goes down the line and the more the children, the last one gets spoilt more than the others and ends up being a little brat or a little sissy, that's the logic we work with. And I kind of equated it like this before I read any of the birth order stuff. I always I worked it out, that those of us who are born first, we're actually icebreakers. You know that? We're icebreakers. You know what an icebreaker does? It gets all built up, it's all strong in the front, and it goes charging into the ice and rides up on the ice and crunch, bash, and it breaks it down and it backs off, and it comes up and bash and crunch and bang, and it backs off, and these other little boats follow it safely behind. And the last boat, if there's been a lot of ice broken, is the most protected little boat of the lot. And I figured it out now. I was the icebreaker. Mum and Dad kept putting the ice up there and I kept breaking it, sometimes to my peril. It was pretty rough go sometimes, and my brothers ought to be eternally grateful to me, but they're not. Not even in the slightest. Because they never had to go through that. They don't understand it, and they never will. Except with their own oldest son or perhaps even oldest daughter. But we have this story where these brothers are so jealous because it said in the end that they knew that their father loved them more than he loved any of them, and they hated him. And to make things worse, he was a God follower in sincere form, and God gave him dreams, which he went and, I think, not wisely, told his brothers. And in the dreams, every time, it was pictures where he had his brothers bowing down to him. And his brothers didn't like that idea. Now, I think he could have told them the dream and let them figure it out. But he was pretty clear about his understanding and interpretation. And his brothers didn't like this thing because no way were they going to bow to him. Well, the story eventuated where eventually we know the end of the story where Joseph, they were going to kill him, and a couple of the brothers who were just at the right age to have some mercy on their youngest brother. They stopped the others from killing him. They put him down a well, sold him to some Midianites, who eventually sold him to some people in Egypt. He ended up a slave there, but eventually he became the governing ruler in the land. And his brothers and their father were without food, and they were sent by their father to Egypt to get food, not knowing that Joseph was there, and they bowed down to their brother, just as God had told him in the dream. An amazing story. I want to suggest this to you. The reason I told you this story. Sometimes we may think we know what is right and wrong about our family. They hated their brother because they thought he was a snotty, spoilt little boy. But at the end of the day, God had his hand on their brother for their benefit, and it was because of him that their lives were saved. It's an amazing story. Then the last story I want to tell you is about two guys, Jacob and Esau, another two guys. Esau and Jacob were twins. Esau was born first, and Jacob was holding on to his heel. That's why he's called Jacob. It has something to do with his name. And he came out. But Esau was a big, hairy man. He was very red at birth as well, we're told. And he was a hairy guy. But the younger brother Jacob was the favorite of his mother, which is often the case. And at the end of their father's life, when he was prone to giving a blessing, which is part of the community of the Israelites, to pass on a blessing was important, to receive a blessing was important. Jacob, with his mother, sought out to deceive his father by putting on goat skins and making himself like his brother, a hairy man. And he received the blessing that was intended for his older brother. There was some extremely powerful sibling rivalry going on here. A desire to be better. And of course, the truth of the matter was, and part of the story that I skipped, one of the things that happened is that one day Esau was very, very, very hungry. And he said, give me some of your pottage, some of your food. And so Jacob said to him, I tell you what, you give me your birthright and you can have some food. And he was so famished, he didn't care about birthrights that day. And in our culture, it means nothing. But in their culture, it meant everything. And so what happened? Esau says, blow the birthright. I want some food. Give me the food. And Jacob said, you give me the birthright before I give you the food. And so Esau did. He gave his birthright away, his right as the older son. So in a kind of sense, you see, their father was going to be wrong to give the blessing to Esau. And so the conniving and sneaky stuff that Jacob and his mother got up to, although it seems wrong, it was kind of right morally. There's kind of twists in the story. And the rivalry was powerful. And the end of the story, of course, is that Jacob got blessed and Esau actually got blessed, but not blessed like he needed to be. So we have some powerful illustrations of sibling rivalry, even in the Bible with God's people who were very special to him. So I want to move on now and look at just some thoughts before we go into this. I want to look at parents and their children. Parents often try to treat everyone equally when we are in fact all different. We are not the same. One of the catch cries of younger children is that it goes like this. It was in my family, was the younger one saying, but you let them do that, because we were older, we were allowed to stay up later. You let them stay up later. But when he was your age, he wasn't allowed to stay up. But that doesn't matter. I'm alive now. I never said it in those words, but that was the message that was being given. After the 5th child, my parents had been worn down so badly that one of them only needed to say, but they've got, and they said, all right, you can have it too. And I felt so angry about that because I wasn't allowed to have it until I was a certain age. And the fact that my parents let my brother, who was 4 years younger than me, have it 4 years earlier was totally and drastically unfair, and I was angry about it. But I was the icebreaker, and he benefited. The truth of the matter is they were probably actually quite wise not treating me, my brother, the same as they treated me, because I think they got it wrong with me at times. They got it wrong with him at times too, but at least they were trying to get it right. I think they were trying to get it right, and I think that's what's important, and we need to be aware of that. So parents often try to treat everyone equally when we're in fact different. Fairness is not fair at that point, necessarily. The second one I'd like to touch on is this one here. Parents who are controlling with the best of intentions will suffer the consequences in their children. I know what this means, and there's some things I can't talk about. I don't think it's appropriate that I talk about publicly at a personal level. But I want to say this really, really clearly. Parents, if you're a parent, this whole sibling thing can be complicated by the things that you do and don't do. And I think you need to be very careful that the models that you've had from your own parenting or the things you said you would not do because your parents did certain things are not necessarily good basis on which to operate. You need to be more objective than that. Subjective reactions to the way we've lived are not healthy reactions in the long term. Some of the most extremely rational people do the most extremely subjective things when it comes to bringing up their children. It's a peculiarity I've noticed over the years, and I've never figured it out. Why do people who seem so rational become so irrational when it comes to their children? It's a difficult one. Then the last one I want to touch on with this parents and children one. There are always unique factors that may influence who you are, at least for a time. Here are some unique factors, and there'll be many others, but I thought these were key ones. Blended family changes. Where, say, I was born into a family, or you were born into a family, and you were born a certain birth order. Say, for example, you were the oldest person. The marriage that one of your parents had collapses, or both parents, obviously, it collapses. So you end up with one of the parents remarrying, and you happen to be living with that parent. They marry somebody who has a child that is older than you and is a first child birth order child, and these two people amalgamate in their relationship, and the children are meant to just blend in together. And it's not going to work very easily because the two firstborns are going to clash. There's going to be problems that need to be addressed. So blended family changes can be one of the things. Illegitimacy. One of the difficulties I had was, as a firstborn child, you'll notice one of the things, it's very important for a firstborn child to have a close relationship with their parents. More so than some of the other children. But because my parents had a shotgun wedding, and my dad was angry about me being born, I didn't have that relationship with my parents. And so some of the difficulties I faced in my childhood, I now recognize why they happened. I now recognize why I went through some of the painful things I went through. But I also, on the other hand, recognize another aspect. One of the things about firstborn children is that they tend to be the ones that are more spiritually aware than other children in the family. Isn't that an interesting thing? The research has shown this. So, not surprising I'm a Christian, in a sense. There are people like, there's one particular book I think that's very helpful. I'll mention this book in case some of you want to go and get it. It's called Birth Order. It's about birth order. So, Why Are You the Way You Are? It's called by Dr. I think it's Dr. Kay Lehman, Leman. And if you grapple with these things, you'll see. Then the last one I want to touch on is the whole business of traumatized parents. Now, not just blended family stuff, but parents who maybe have had a broken relationship, they're on their own, or they've had an early death of a parent, or a death of a child, or a death of their husband or wife. Those kinds of things, traumatized families, actually it changes the dynamics, and so it affects the children. However, there's an interesting note. When those same children become adults, they will slowly but surely slip into the birth order patterns that were pretty much understood throughout all sorts of cultures. And by the way, this is not a Western culture locked set of thinking. There's all sorts of evidence from numbers of cultures that show exactly the same patterns. And certainly the biblical images that I shared with you earlier clearly show some of those patterns. So let's have a really quick look at it. First of all, each of us is unique, and that's great. Loving ourselves, I think, is important in all God's designed potential, because it will bring real long-term satisfaction and joy to us. When Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? He said these words. He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. You cannot truly love your neighbor until you've learned to love yourself. And part of this journey, please, don't beat up on yourself as a consequence of this. Let's pick it up and say, here are my strengths, here are the dangers. I'm going to avoid the dangers. I'm going to be a different person from today onwards. Amen? Hello? I can see you, so you can't tell me you're not there. So I'm going to very quickly go through 7 different sets of sheets. This is the first birth position number 1. The first son or the first daughter, you'll see they're slightly different. And I'm just going to quickly go through them. In terms of the expressive mode of the person, they tend to be mind-based. Thing evolves around the mental aspects of the human being. The firstborn son tends to be a thinking inward person. They tend to be in personality role, they tend to be the dreamers, they tend to be independent. Their focus and outlook has to do with, tends to be focused in the way of the fact that they're mentally detached and they are inward creative people. They tend to have high creativity. If they're given the opportunity, it gets even higher. The needs from their parents that they have for a firstborn son are respect. Their parents should be listening to them. Their parents should give them freedom, and parents should give them time. The irony of is that most firstborn sons and firstborn daughters don't get the freedom because they're the icebreakers. But they are the very things that they actually need. The firstborn daughter is a verbal outward person. They tend to have a matriarchal type of attitude, and they want to be matriarchal problem solvers. In other words, they're the female queen, the ruler, in a sense, over the family. Now, no yelling out yes too much, because we know your family members might be here. That's dangerous. Okay. Their focus and outlook is they're strong-willed, mature, and they tend to be family-oriented. I actually noticed this with my sister. She became mature a lot earlier than I did. She was 2 years younger than me. I didn't dare tell her that when we were younger. Perhaps it would have been good if I had. She might have liked me a bit more. The needs from the parents that the firstborn daughter has are play, lots of play, and fathers tend to do that with their daughters, but not so much with their sons. Trust, closeness, and stability. In terms of their parental relationships on the firstborn son, the parental relationships, the fathers, they tend to be the father's teacher and the mother's protector. I saw this at 10 years old really clearly when my father and mother had a major conflict one night, and I went to the kitchen and I was going to do something rather disastrous, which I won't talk about tonight because of some of the people who are present here. I was so angry. I was my mother's protector that night. And I only recently, actually 4 years ago, told my mother about that situation. She was horrified to discover not only that I knew what had happened, but that I intended taking some pretty serious action about it, and then chickened out because I thought my father knew where I was. The firstborn son ideally becomes a leader, a public server, and a visionary. Pretty classical, pretty clear. When they become imbalanced, they become silently rebellious and self-sabotaging. In other words, they will actually destroy themselves from within. And that's pretty destructive. That's not good. And they won't even recognize that they're doing it. And in terms of the energetic essence of who they are, they tend to have a fair amount of humility, and they're self-actualized. They know how to do things. They'll approach things themselves. The firstborn daughter competes with the mother and directs the father. Haven't you seen that? Okay. They ideally become a positive leader, a great teacher, and a great mother. That's what happens with them. They tend to be great in those areas. When they are in balance, they become serious people, too serious. They become controlling and dominant. What's this shit business going on in the back there? Okay. As long as you're talking about yourself, we don't mind. And then the energetic essence is they have a pure love of life. When they get into a good balance, they just love life, and life lives, and everybody around them's a party. And it's great fun. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next one, the second position. Now, let me clarify this. There was one little wee trick in this thing. A firstborn son is a firstborn. The daughter, if there's a girl born next, she is the firstborn daughter. She's not the secondborn daughter. She's the first girl born, so she's therefore the firstborn daughter. You get that? Okay? So, and in actual fact, it's intriguing because some people who did their research, particularly in Sweden, they just studied men. Why on earth they only studied men, nobody knows. But others have actually studied both sexes. And it's interesting because there are some significant differences, but they're not totally different, you know. They're similar in some ways, and you'll see that. Their expressive mode for the second-born son is the emotional and outward. The champion, the underdog achiever, is their personality sort of thing and role in life. Their focus and their outlook, they're emotionally determined, and they physically tend to be very strong. It's true. The needs from their parents that they need clear direction, physical interaction, and limits. They need clear limits to be put in place. That's for second-born son. Second-born daughter. They're creative, inward people. They tend to be the priestess and the creative. I don't know how many of you have seen some of those television programs that tell the story of some of the ballerina stars and things like that. A number of them come from that kind of background. They tend to have this priestess thing. They tend to be, you know, high up there. Their focus and their outlook, they are emotional. Their emotion is strong there, but they're detached at the same time. It's kind of a funny mix with them. They're subtle, and they're self-aware of things. They're always worried about themselves, in fact, when they get into bad state. Always concerned about things, how they look, everything matters. The needs from their parents is respect, fantasy, space, and gentleness. And hey, let me tell you this, that most second-born daughters actually will turn around and tell you that you don't love them at some stage. It will happen. It's not because you don't love them, it's just because of the self-awareness thing, which is different. And so knowing how to respond to that for a parent is very difficult. Parental relationships. They want, the second-born son wants the father and repels the mother. They ideally become goal-oriented, and they're competitive, and they're achieving. When they're in balance, they are angry, they are blaming, reactive, and cynical. Can you see what was happening here on stage today? Now, I don't know which son it was meant to be, but that's the kind of attitude that was there. And then the energetic essence are excitement, success, is sitting there. They have lots of excitement bubbling away. They're success-oriented and or embodied. Success is an important aspect of who they are. Then the second-born daughter, they're self-reliant, sensitive, independent. Then they become designers, success-oriented type people, and they're softly alert people. They are not necessarily loud in their alertness. They're softly alert. They see things and perceive things that the firstborn might not perceive and see. When they're in balance, they become loners. They may switch from being very popular in a crowd, and when they get into imbalance, they become loners. They become doubtful, they become manipulative, and they become moody. And the energetic essence is that they're pure essence of feminine mystery. Nobody quite understands this one, and it's interesting to read some of the comments that people make. They say, there's things you just don't understand about a second-born daughter in terms of who they are. They're a mystery sometimes. You can't figure them out fully. There's certain things about them that just don't fit a particular pattern. They seem to change fairly regularly. Let's move on. The third-born. The third-born son. This is the third son born. Remember, it's not the third child, the third son. They are strong in communication, and they are inward. They tend to be the chess masters and the chameleon. They can change their colour, their spots. They can make themselves fit in around where they are. They're quietly clever. They're social and mediating type people, and they're very quick. The needs from their parents is their parents need to challenge them, not give in to them like parents mostly do by the time they got to the third-born son. They need alertness all the time. The parents have got to be alert because they'll get up to mischief that the other sons didn't get up to. And their inner mechanics need addressing all the time. Who they are, what they're thinking. The parents need to be on the ball about picking up on those things. Otherwise, they'll keep sliding into trouble. The third-born daughter, they have a strong will and they're quite outward. They're the earth goddess. They're different to the priestess. They're the earth goddess. They're the daughter of Solomon. They think they are everything. In terms of their focus and outlook, they are community aware. Actual fact, a lot of these third-born daughters actually become very proactive in the community as they grow older. And you'll find a lot of them in places like school boards and places like that. They're physical, but they also can be quite traditional. The rest of the family can be quite radical, but they'll be quite conservative in some of the things that they do. And then their needs from their parents, they need information. They really appreciate the sharing of nature together with them, and they like a lot of involvement from their parents, and especially physical touch is really important to them. Now, if you've got any, I just suddenly became aware of something as I was speaking. If you've got any adopted children, the best thing you can do is try and find out what birth order they have so that it can help you to know how to manage them the best. Pretty obvious statement in a way, but it's not always obvious when you're in the middle of it all. In terms of their parental relationships, the third-born son is shy, generally, and slippery. And they try to balance their parents off against each other. Not in a negative way, they try and balance both sides. They tend to become ideal strategists, controllers, and advisors. When they're imbalanced, they become manipulative, secretive, and unethical. They will do things that other people will shudder at. And their energetic essence, their fluid movement of social connections is huge. The third daughter preserves life, extends social stability. She tends to become a healer, a community resource, and can often become a judge with a fair amount of fairness and willingness to try and help everybody. When imbalanced, they become blocked. They block things, they block people out, and they become dependent on others, and they become critical and very willful, and you will not change their mind. It doesn't matter what you say. And they'll tell you that too. What's more? And the energetic essence is that their pure experience of feminine nurturing is what they're really all about. They love to nurture, and they're really good at it. Now I'm just going to, with the next two, I'm just going to put up the sheet and let you look at it for a moment. I want to change the pattern, otherwise it becomes boring. I heard you. The fourth born son. Read that one first. Notice the needs from the parents are attention, optimism, and creativity. The parents actually need to push the bar a little bit higher about what they're doing with their children once they get more children at this stage, because the other children are starting to excel, and this child needs special attention in that area. And then the daughter, of course, very wide situation happens with them. When they become imbalanced, they do some very different things to other people. And they need that real sense of privacy. The next sheet of that same one. Ideally becomes the entertainer, leader, and organizer. When they become imbalanced, they become reckless, demanding, depressed. Don't let them drive the car, by the way, when they become imbalanced. And the fourth born daughter challenges the parents very strongly, and the parents tend to give in. They ideally become inspired visionaries, teachers, and even philosophers. And when in balance, they're suffering as recluses. They withdraw from people. They become reckless and rebellious. But when they're living in a positive light, in a positive place, their energetic essence is pure grace and forgiveness. They just abound with grace and forgiveness. So they go from one extreme to the other when they're in imbalance, and more extreme than some of the other personalities, aspects of people in that birth order. The next one there. The fifth son, the artist, the servant, the quiet, gentle, giving person. The independence that they need from their parents is quite high, because the parents will start to try and cuddle them because they're youngest at that stage. They might not be going to have another one, or if they're going to have another one, they still seem to look after them pretty well. And they need compassion and touch. The interesting thing about the fifth-born daughter is that she's caring and outward. Actually, we've got really close friends who've got 10 children, and it's interesting to look at what's happened to their 10 kids. Very interesting patterns there. And one of the things that they need from their parents is broad vision, strong support, the girl does. And then the parent relationships, they have an innocent, obedient sort of attitude. They ease the parents with the things they say to them. And it's interesting that both the boy and the girl are very similar in that way. Quiet the family, ease the parents. And when they get imbalanced, they become confused, dependent, withdrawn. And once again, very similar, both of them there. And the energetic essence, the male brings beauty and peace to all people around them. One of the difficulties that's been studied by sociologists at this level is that if they get badly treated, in fact, the fourth and fifth borns, if they get badly treated by somebody else, in fact, if it's abuse, they will tend to actually have gender problems. It's a serious issue that they face. Where did I get up to there? Okay, I'm going to do the last two fairly quickly. This is the sixth-born son, or the sixth-born daughter. Not very many of you be in that position. Anybody here in that place? You come from a family big enough to have that many? Oh, well, I better do it then, eh? There's several of them. There's some big families in this church. Great. They tend to be people who are collective and outward. They tend to want to be part of everything that's happening. Their personality is they have authority. They tend to become the generals. And the focus and outlook is that they're aware, dynamic, commanding. They're actually often very charismatic figures. The needs from their parents, the wisdom, integrity, and truth, because they don't always get a healthy perspective on that. And for the sixth-born daughter, she's the princess again, the illuminated. She knows everything. Actually, the reason for that is because the parents are getting so old that their education is very stale and their child is very modern, and so the parents can't keep up with it. And if you don't think it's serious, hey, you want to go through it. You know when the education system in New Zealand changed and the new maths came in, they called it new maths. What do they call it now? Maths. Oh, okay. I guess that figures. It's maths. But when new maths came in, I could not get my head around it. And my daughters come home and want help with homework, and I'm going, oh man, these are only little kids, and I'm trying to figure this out. And I got top in New Zealand in calculus. And I had real trouble getting my head around it. Because the new maths, they had new ideas and new approaches. And it was just outside my framework of thinking. I worked with foot and inches. You come along and you move into metric, and then you start using figures in a way that I've never used figures before, and you add and multiply by running figures down, and I just got totally confused. And I had to say to Adele in particular in the early stages, I can't do much to help you on this one. I don't understand it. And that was pretty hard for a dad to swallow, eh? So there we are. The female, the princess, the illuminated, socially, religiously sensitive. It's interesting, at this point, the woman becomes religiously sensitive. She's this far down, more so than any other child. Needs from her parents are patience and spiritual guidance and freedom. Actually, if you don't have a relationship with God, you can't hope to give your children what they need sometimes. It's a reality. In terms of parental relationships, the male moves, directs, challenges parents, and the female increases awareness of and brings in changes. They ideally become builders, political movers, and inventors, which is kind of a reverse thinking to the way that people used to think when I was younger. The female becomes awakened, successful, and often very prophetic in society. When imbalanced, the male becomes a dictator, ruthless, and narrow-minded, and the female becomes demanding, arrogant, and isolated. Getting two things together there. Energetic essence are have a focused fusion. They really do get focused, and they're pure-centered silence. Now, I want to finish with the only born, because there's some people who are the only child. They are very similar, and I don't want to say much more than this. They're very, very similar to the firstborn child, except all you do, and all the different books say the same thing about this. You get the same things almost. Some of the wording's been changed and things like that. Most of the things are similar, except that the difference is they consider themselves to be equal to their parents. That's a big shift. But the one thing you do is you get the firstborn characteristics and you put the word super in front of it. Super emotional or super whatever it happens to be, the thing that is there. So only born child tends to be like that, and they don't recognize it, and unfortunately the parents don't, and so they are very often perceived to be very spoiled. One of the things about them is the guys tend to be dad's mate, but they also tend to be the fount of knowledge, and they annoy everybody around them. They tend to be mega movers of the world when they get older, not when they're younger. The girls tend to be daddy's girl and mum's friend, but also mum's antagonist. And then when they become imbalanced, they're unforgiving, they're active, aggressive people, and they divide and conquer. And once again, very similar thing, unforgiving, active, controller, and they divide and conquer. And the energetic essence that they have a humility, when they're really in a good place, they have a really good humility, but it's fairly rare. And they have a pure love of life. So I want to finish with these last two slides. It's a whole bunch of information we've looked at. And the thing I want us to end with tonight is to look at it and say, look, God designed you to be great in your way. He didn't design you to be great like somebody else. It's no good you trying to be me or me trying to be you. Some of you know when I've tried to be some of you, when I tried dancing. Manu, who's here, Manu and Rosella, are here visiting down from Auckland at the moment. Manu used to lead our creative arts team here. I think we should give him a hand because he was one of the seedbeds that are here. He's a very humble man, and he wants to kick me when I do things like that. So, but Manu used to humble me and the whole congregation every now and again by getting me to dance one dance that I'd originally danced when I first had the whole idea. And God, in spite of me, moved. But I wouldn't dare try to be a dancer. And you shouldn't dare try to be a preacher unless God has wired you up for that. And your birth order is going to help you understand what you might be able to possibly do. And if you keep getting frustrated and you keep trying to be something you aren't and it doesn't work out, I want to tell you this right now. You need to spend some time trying to figure this thing out. Because unless you do, you're going to keep trying to copy somebody else instead of being who you are designed to be. And I love you as you are when you are natural and normal. I see Ben Hibbard here. I hope Ben doesn't mind me picking on him right now. Ross, who's just gone out with his little one to look after his little one right now, is in the same boat. But Ben Hibbard. Ben, can you stand for me? I'm sorry to put you in the spot. I'm not really sorry, but you know. This is Ben. Ben, for a number of years, you can sit down again. Ben, for a number of years, has been trying to figure out what he's good at. And he's a mystery to himself and everybody else. Most of us are. And suddenly, recently, we had this event which a man from America called Greg Laurie came to, and we asked Ben to take on a responsibility. It was just as if we slammed the biggest light switch on inside this guy. Because suddenly, he changed from this guy who was quietly in the group, quietly there. You could see sometimes he was struggling with trying to figure out who he was. And sometimes I think he felt kind of envious that other people were doing things that he couldn't figure out what he could do. I think it's pretty true in lots of ways, isn't it? Yeah, he's nodding his head. I haven't asked him about this. I just have observed these things with him. But when we asked him this thing, it's kind of like we slammed a huge switch inside his life, and he went, bing! And suddenly Ben's a different man. That's the power of what can happen when we understand who we are, or when we discover what God has wired us up to do. And it can be an exciting journey, a truly inspiring, exciting journey. And Ben's on that journey, and God's designed him to be great, and he's designed him to be great in the way he is, and you won't be great like anybody else because you are you. You are not somebody else. And that's important. So I want to finish with this last slide. Here's the Malley siblings. You can see they've got... I'm not sure whether it's different parents or whether they're blended family or not, but I found this image of these people. There are a bunch of things that you can do to make things work. You can look at the things that we looked at tonight, and you can think about those things, and you can think, what are the things I need to address? What are the things I know are the default settings, the bad things that go wrong? And what do I need to do to address those things and get away from those things? And most of all, the question I think is primary, is more important than any other question, is what has God designed me to be really good at and to do really well in? Because if I discover that and I let Him do the work in me, and I'm willing to go through the hard things and face up to the tough issues I'm going to have to face, because we've all messed up, we've all got it wrong, and we've all made mistakes. And if you tell me you haven't, I'm sorry, but the fact that you're telling me you haven't is a mistake. So all of us need to be aware of the fact that we've got some work to do. But it's not a bad thing. It's an exciting thing, because the end result's got to be the best. And I want you all to participate in that. We covered a lot of ground tonight, and that's only a small percentage of the total picture. But I pray that it's helped you to realize that you just shouldn't equate yourself with somebody else. You shouldn't try and be like another person in your family. You are you. So let's talk to God together. God, we want to ask you to help us tonight. God, we've sometimes got it wrong, and we've tried to be something we're not. We've tried to do things we shouldn't have even been trying. Sometimes we've tried to do the right things for the very right reasons and haven't got it right, but you know who we are. Your scripture very clearly says you knew us before we were even born. You knew what we were going to be like. You knew how we were going to be shaped. You even knew what size tummy we were going to have. And God, in that kind of intimate detail, we would like to know how we could live to the optimum, how we could have the best life possible, that we can really enjoy it, that we can really know satisfaction in our walks with you, that we can have a light switched on in our lives like has happened with Ben. So help us, we pray, and forgive us for the times when we've messed up with our siblings, and we've messed up with situations, when we have been selfish or controlling, or we've been withdrawn, or we've done all sorts of different things, when we've been in a state which has been a state of a wrong attitude with you and with others around us. Forgive us, we pray, for those things. And we'd ask you to help us on the journey in the future. In Jesus' mighty name. And all the people said,